Could you guys move like up into the front couple of pews? Just.
We're the kind of kids that like to sit in very.
Yeah, I know. So this is the new groove that I'm inviting you into. Co and Jessa, do you mind moving up? Either. Very good. All right, well, welcome. I know we'll have others that'll be joining us as the time goes by. How about I'll introduce you and then I'll go get the stragglers. Yeah. So welcome to this Faith Formation Hour guest speaker. Today we have with us Renee Saucedo, and in just a moment I'm going to ask Jenny Douglas to introduce her, but I also want to let you know that in 2 weeks, during this hour, our congregation will be gathering for a special meeting, and during that time, we're going to be taking up the question of whether to designate ourselves as a sanctuary congregation. And we do have a few more hard copies of the statement of what that would mean in the narthex on the welcome table. We can also make more of those copies as well, and there's going to be a link to that on all church emails coming up in the next 2 weeks. So there will always be a link there if you want to look and see what that statement is. But first I would like to introduce Jenny Douglas, who, along with Judy Davison, are our church's representatives to North Bay Organizing Project, and they are also the two that formed a new team called the Faith in Action Team. And that Faith in Action Team is also now serving as our Sanctuary Task Force. So I'd like to invite Jenny forward to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Welcome. And I see a few more people coming in. Well, I am thrilled to have Renee Saucedo with us today. Renee has worked in the Immigrant and Worker rights movement for 35 years as an organizer, advocate, educator, and attorney. And she currently works with the Raizes Collective, building leadership and political power with the Immigrant and Indigenous women of ALMAS LIBRES. And she's also a leader of the Sonoma County Sanctuary Coalition that has been meeting since the election in November. And Judy and Victoria and I have been working with her on that. And I'm sure she'll share more about that. And she'll be talking with us today about what it means to be in solidarity with vulnerable members of our community and how we can work together to protect our immigrant neighbors. And Renee is amazing, and we're really lucky to have her with us today. So welcome, Renee.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Oh, what a pleasure and an honor it is to be here with you at your congregation here in Sebastopol on this beautiful day, beautiful Sunday morning. I'd like to share a little bit about who I am first before we plunge into the topic of sanctuary and immigrant rights. I was born and raised here in California in the Bay Area, but also lived a few years during my childhood in Mexico. My mother is a migrant from Yucatan, Mexico, which is the southern tip of Mexico. Maybe some of you have been there. And my dad is first generation Chicano, born and raised in San Francisco's Mission District. And so when they divorced, I was about, 4. My mother said, I don't like living in this country anymore. So she took my brother and me to live in Mexico City, which was a huge culture shock. But when we moved back to live full time with my dad, even though I was born here and have U.S. citizenship, I realized that I identified with communities and families who migrated, who went back and forth, who had mixed families, etc. Right? I felt proud to be part of that experience. And I just happened to be born on this side of the border. And so I gained a lot of privilege because of that. And I felt compelled to use my privilege to give back to my community. So, and I had experiences which I used in my adult life, in my professional life as an immigrant rights advocate. Right? When I was young, growing up in San Francisco, being raised by my grandmother while my mom was working, having to be the official interpreter whenever she went to the grocery store, which was fine. Tell the man I will not pay more than a quarter for these bananas. Right? My grandma says that she won't pay more than 25 cents. But it got more serious when she went to the doctor or when she had to talk to the landlord. And I felt like, this isn't right. This isn't right that I'm like, 8 years old and I'm funneling this information back and forth between these two adults. And then actually about 7 years ago, I was living up in Humboldt County at the time. I had the horrible experience when my mother was picked up at the San Francisco International Airport and deported that same night. Actually, it's one of the most devastating things I've ever experienced. It was ironic, that I had for so many years worked on immigrant rights issues, supporting other families, right? Oh, I'm so lucky, I'm so privileged. I'm a U.S. citizen that I never have to deal with this. But they arrested her. It was actually about a week after President Trump was elected for the first time. And I remember, my brother-in-law, who was an attorney, came down to the airport and said, I'm her legal counsel, let me see her. They wouldn't let us see her, and they put her on a plane that very night. And I was lucky, because of all this U.S. citizenship privilege, I was able to get her back because she was in her early 80s. She had the beginnings of Alzheimer's, and I was her only caretaker. So I was able to get her in 3 months, using all my contacts at a national level, pressuring elected officials. I was able to get her back in about 3 months, had to hire an attorney, did all the legal work for the attorney. She came back, we went to get her, it was the savior trip. We brought her back, and I was supposed to send her back to Mexico after a year, after looking for care there. Well, I never sent her back. She's here in Santa Rosa at Santa Rosa Post-Acute, receiving the health care that she needs, and I'm close to her. But the moral of this story is that, our families never know what could happen, even though we are born here. And I felt this huge betrayal. I felt like this country and the systems within it were not set up for me ever. And so my first thought was, this is the way God is telling me I need to get into the fight even more. But I think that what I realized the most is that we are all struggling not only for others, but for ourselves. Because most of our immigrant families, including in our area, are what we call mixed families, right? U.S. citizens, legal permanent residents, undocumented grandparents, etc. Well, why don't they adjust their status? Well, maybe because they can't. There's no process for them. And those of you who are service providers, right, know this better than anyone. And so it was a combination of things that made me do this kind of work. I started out as a legal service provider, and for the past several years, I've been a full-time community organizer, which means that I support the coming together of undocumented migrants, for the most part, right now, mostly women, who set their agenda, who are trained in how to push policy forward, how to talk to the media, how to make demands and push for those demands. These courageous women, I can't tell you how honored I am to be able to work with them every day. And my philosophy of social change, particularly in the immigrant rights movement, is that we must follow the leadership of migrants themselves. We must let go of this desire to control those of us who have the privilege and allow for self-determination, right? Support. Tell me how I can show up and support you after you decide what it is you're going to demand and how you're going to get there. That is my philosophy as a community advocate, community organizer. So, Jenny mentioned that now, in response to Trump's second election, heaven forbid, I mean, there's so much we could say about that. Here in Sonoma County, what is most important is that people like yourselves came together to organize. People didn't just sit on their hands, including undocumented migrants, saying, oh, well, I guess we're just going to have to hold our breaths for the next 4 to 8 or more years. The Sonoma County Sanctuary Coalition consists of almost 200 people, representing dozens and dozens of organizations and institutions in the county, like congregations, like service providers, and like undocumented immigrant community members who have come together to say, we are going to make Donald Trump's job as difficult as possible because we believe in basic human rights. And the Sonoma Sanctuary Coalition has 3 main working groups. We have the advocacy group, which is advocating for Sonoma County to become a sanctuary county so that the sheriff stops offering information to ICE. We have a services working group, which works on maximizing the coordination of services that are needed, especially legal services in these dark times. Sonoma County, by the way, since Trump announced that he was going to start conducting mass deportations, ICE has arrested and placed in deportation 8 people. So not the hundreds of people that we see in Chicago, Bakersfield, closer to home, but we're bracing for the worst. We're bracing for the worst. The Sonoma County Sanctuary Coalition is about local resistance. It's about confronting the deportations, confronting the fear and the terror that our community is feeling right now, with love and compassion through actions like the mobilization we had recently in front of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce mixer. Did any of you hear about that? Oh, it was glorious. It was spectacular. Why were we there? Well, because Sheriff Ingram, we've been meeting with him for years, asking him to have a complete non-collaboration policy with ICE. And he keeps saying no. And the Board of Supervisors kept telling us, well, we're not going to pass anything because the sheriff says that he won't implement it. And the sheriff says, well, they haven't asked me to implement anything. So we mobilized at least 100 people, for those of you who were there, right? Yeah, thank you. And after the picket line and the speeches, and most of the people there, by the way, were undocumented migrants, undocumented women, some of them with their children. In case you were wondering if the terror has caused people to become paralyzed, no, it has not. No, they're doing it for their families. And so after the rally, I got up there and said, okay, gang, thank you so much for showing up. I think we sent a very loud message to the sheriff that we're going to continue to bug him. And the women from ALMAS LIBRES, most of them undocumented, said, oh no, we're going in. We're going in. I said, are you sure you want to do that? Oh, yeah. And they went in, and we asked questions, we made comments. A day later, the sheriff changes his policy. Only convicted people of serious crimes will now be reported to ICE in Sonoma County. It's progress. It's not exactly what we've been asking for, but it's progress. So the Sonoma County Sanctuary Coalition, coordinated and administered by my organization, Raizes Collective, is about local resistance. You might ask, well, what is the church's role in this local organizing? Because, by the way, it's not only local, it's regional, it's national. We're part of networks that are working at all levels, right? At the local level, we're pushing for sanctuary policies. We're developing rapid response networks so that people can respond immediately if ICE shows up in a certain neighborhood. We're getting in the way. I won't give too much details about that. But we're getting in the way so that ICE's job is a lot more difficult. At a statewide level, migrants are pushing for a blanket prohibition of sharing of information. You all know that the state of California passed SB 54, or the California Sanctuary Law. It covers, it protects people who have committed what are considered minor crimes. In our community, we are trying to combat this notion of the good immigrants and the bad immigrants. There are people who get caught up in the criminal justice system, sometimes unfairly, many times unfairly, because of racial profiling, racial bias, etc. Or if they did something bad, they pay the consequences, and they serve time, or they are put on probation or parole. Our position around that is that people should not be punished twice. That people pay the consequences if they make a mistake, just like anyone in any other community does. And so that's why we continue to push for an outright prohibition here in Sonoma County and in California. I just wanted to give a little bit of background on that. And then nationally, let me share with you that we're very excited. We continue to push for a path to citizenship. A lot of people don't know that. They say, well, we're busy enough fighting Trump. What a waste of time. What a waste of time pushing for immigration reform. But it's not, because even though our legislation will probably not pass this year, we continue to build power. We continue to build community power. We continue to educate Congress, the community decision makers, right? A path to citizenship, a reasonable path for people who have been here a certain number of years to be able to apply for legal permanent residency. That's what we want. And so we continue to build support for that. Any questions or comments so far before I jump into the role of churches in all this? I'm trying to condense all this information into a few minutes. Yes. Oh, yeah.
Well, but we need to make sure that it's heard on the live stream. Can you help Renee just shift over to the corded mic?
I was asking if you have numbers of, like, are they also looking in Boston for all the folks from Ireland who are here past their visas? And how about up in Minnesota, where my friends from Scandinavia live? Is it serious?
Well, I appreciate that rhetorical question. I can't tell you for sure if they are, but they haven't received the public attention that migrants of color have received, right? Black and brown migrants in particular. Migrants from Latin America, from Haiti, Dominican Republic, Venezuela. So, of course, that brings up the issue of racism and how racism is showing up in all of this. It's not about legalities, like, you know, my descendants did it legally. Why can't people do it legally now? And I sigh. Because the processes that exist now, if they do exist for people, like with family, with relatives who are here, it takes decades. It takes decades, and someone's not going to wait decades to be reunited with family. And also, you know, the level of dehumanization that we're seeing. Not only now, we've seen it, I mean, we saw it in the 90s here in California with Governor Pete Wilson. Remember that? When Proposition 187 passed? Right, Ben? And we've seen it throughout time. We see how opportunist elected officials and others use the dehumanization and the scapegoating of migrants of color in order to scare. They're all gang members and criminals and terrorists. I mean, but Trump is just more explicit about it. And he keeps repeating it. Yeah, so, you know, so now, and people don't realize the consequences. Yesterday, I was with some friends. We ran a run in San Francisco, and my friend's husband, who's dark complexion Latino, said, well, look, I carry with me, because he's retired now. He says, I carry my old business card with me, because he used to be a federal parole officer, in case I get stopped. He says, you never know. You know, they might put me in a van and take me to the nearest detention center. So my dad, who I saw just yesterday, is you know, walking around like, yeah, they probably think I'm a mojado, you know, a wetback. So it's seeping into all aspects of our families. And you can't talk about this issue without the racial component. Of course, there's racism happening. When I see the Department of Homeland Security woman, her commercials, self-deport yourselves. I mean, you know, as I'm a U.S. citizen, and the post-traumatic stress still kicks in for me, right? With the American flags waving. So it's a very clear message that, you know, we're not welcome, you are undervalued, you are less than. It's the level of dehumanization that causes people to support policies, that turns into policy like U.S.-born children of undocumented parents shouldn't get U.S. citizenship. Or what we were dealing with back with Prop 187, it's the same trash, you know, that undocumented migrants would be reported. There was a mandate that service providers, teachers, doctors, nurses would report people who are undocumented. The Sensenbrenner bill in the mid-1990s, I don't know if you remember, called out faith leaders specifically. If you aid undocumented migrants, you will be criminalized. That's when people came out in the millions on the streets. Hey, don't be messing with my priest or pastor, you know? So, yes, the racial element is real, as it has been throughout our country's history. Right? Yeah. Okay, any other comments before we move on to the role of the churches? Thank you for that. Oh, yes.
Hold on one sec.
I'm just curious, since you mentioned this idea that it's been going on forever, which it has been. How do
Yeah.
we break the cycle?
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about the election and the message that in the media we know is biased anyway, a lot of it. Why is it that there was a greater percentage of Mexican Americans that voted for Trump?
Yeah.
What was the message that was delivered, and how do you get rid of that, you know?
Yeah. You know, we talk about this a lot amongst family and friends within the Latinx community. We say, what the heck happened, right? And different people have different responses to that question. If you see the stats, it was mainly Latino men who voted for Trump, more than women, although some women did. And I think that it's probably a combination of, I think mainly it has to do with an adaptation to this culture, unfortunately. An adaptation to the U.S. culture of, give me what's mine. And sometimes generationally, you know, it just takes one generation to lose the values that your family brought with you. And so we have Latinx legal permanent residents and U.S. citizens who fell for the same rhetoric that everyone else did. Like, hey, he's gonna lower my taxes, and he's gonna make business boom, and I have a small business, so I personally am gonna benefit by the Trump presidency. This individualistic view of things. The hope, you know, the hope that we have is that young people, I don't know if you've noticed on the news, the marches and the school walkouts, they've been led by young people. The young people who were born here, who say things like, I'm doing this on behalf of my parents who feel still fearful to come out and protest. So, yeah, you know, our community enjoys some privileges, and if you've been here a generation or two, you assimilate, and you adopt the dominant values of individualism and profit, and rather than community and sharing. Right? So, okay. So, thank you. I don't want to run out of time. So, the role of the churches. The churches are a vital part of the immigrant rights movement, locally, regionally, and nationally. And you are a vital part of the Sonoma County Sanctuary Coalition. In addition to sending amazing, fabulous representatives who are doing the hard work, you as a congregation offer the moral support to communities who feel right now under siege. You offer them that moral support that they may not be receiving anywhere else, except for their small circles of friends and family members, many of them in the same situation as they are. So I can't tell you how many people in my organization who have said, I'm just amazed by how many, they call you sometimes Americanos. I'm just amazed at how many Americanos care about us, are standing up for us. That's important when you are in a state of constant distress, including the children of the undocumented parents and grandparents, because even though they might be U.S. citizens, they say, well, I am sad and worried. We hear this in our youth group, because when I get home from school, I don't know if my parents are going to be there. So you offer that moral support. We stand with you. You give moral legitimacy to their right to be here, and you offer an efficient way to mobilize supporters. It's great because through our Sanctuary Coalition, many congregations are mobilizing their members to sign up for certain situations. For example, we have congregations who are preparing for families who need temporary housing. ICE shows up, they're looking for one person, that person, maybe they arrest that person, but the family's afraid that they're going to come back, so they decide to move. This was the case that we got just a few days ago. And the attorney assisting the family asked me, okay, heads up, I'm going to call you in a few days because we might need temporary lodging. Okay. Mobilize for the actions. Many congregation members were at the sheriff action. Some were interviewed by the press. That's very powerful. Very powerful. Benjamin is going to be part of a public press conference organized by the faith community here in Sonoma County. That's very powerful for the community to feel that support, and the community at large to say, oh, what's going on here? Maybe it's not as black and white as I thought. And why is a public declaration of sanctuary important? Because I know that you as a congregation are considering that. A public declaration of sanctuary is an important piece of the local resistance, because it sends a message that you are not participating in the othering and the dehumanizing of entire communities, and that you will join in the resistance against immoral policies and practices. This is about standing up in the name of morality, compassion. Do I hear L word? Love, right? That is what we're standing up for. We're standing up for human beings who, like other communities in this country's history, have been deemed illegals. Should we go back to the African slaves, right? The Japanese Americans who were interned? The Irish, right? It seems like most of our communities have been deemed illegal at one point or another. How soon we forget. How soon we forget our personal histories. Yes.
We are one.
That's right.
And it's not only people of ethnic difference, but it's everyone who has a difference, including those with disabilities who have to be afraid, because if they get what they want with you guys, probably the next people who are going to come after are people with disabilities.
That's right. It's like none of us are safe, right? I mean, he's attacking undocumented migrants, trans folks, the LGBTQ plus community in general. I mean, that's right. Special kids with special needs. Yeah, are they going to be deemed illegals at some point too? Well, it's a matter of respecting our laws. No, not if your laws are immoral. You can pass any law you want, but we're not going to follow your laws if they are dehumanizing and attacking an entire population for absolutely no reason. Right? And yesterday when I had lunch with my dad, he said, well, what do you argue when people say that, you know, that we should wait our turn and they should respect U.S. laws? And I say, well, it's not that clear, because what has the U.S. government done in other countries that has caused people to be displaced and have to migrate? Right? We never talk about that. The economic policies, the military policies, right? People are coming. Well, of course they're trying to migrate. They're trying to survive and feed their children. You think they want to leave their homes? I've been in the immigrant rights movement for decades, and everyone consistently says, or not everyone, I shouldn't say 100%, but most people say, I didn't want to leave my parents. I didn't want to leave my children. You know how many women in ALMAS LIBRES had to leave their children behind out of necessity just to feed them, and haven't seen their children for decades? I mean, the right to your family, that's a basic human right, I think. So, we as congregations and people of faith have to stand up for humanity. And we're not fooled by this legal versus illegal, by people who are the ones who make the laws. We care about people. We care about each other, no matter what our color and our place of origin. So, are there any possible challenges? I think I heard that some people in your congregation were thinking, well, what if we have vigilantes? You know, I do get hate mail. Hate messages. I've gotten them over the years. Have you guys? Have you gotten some? Yeah. Was it worth it? Absolutely. Was I afraid? Once. When I got a letter saying, die, whore, die. You know, I had to report it to the police. But it never stopped me in my work. And I've never heard of a church being attacked since the civil rights movement in the South, when churches back then were being bombed. But in the context of immigrant rights, I've never heard of vigilantism or, churches being attacked or anything like that. What might be some other concerns that you have about declaring yourselves sanctuary? Are there any other concerns?
Maybe some individuals might think that if a church is a sanctuary church, that they could bring their family and their sleeping bags and pillows and stuff and just sleep here and live here. So I don't know.
Well, the sanctuary movement of the 1980s, late 70s, 1980s, they did more of that. The churches were used as literal sanctuary spaces where people could come in and just be. I don't know if you remember, there was one case in Chicago where a woman sequestered herself in a church for months, and finally ICE came in and arrested her. The sanctuary movement does not look the same these days as it did in the 1980s because for various reasons, including the fact that the Trump administration has said there are no safe spaces under my administration. Before, there were administrative directives that said hospitals, churches, and schools were off limits for obvious policy reasons, right? There have to be spaces where people aren't afraid of being arrested by federal law enforcement. But Trump has changed that. So churches are fair game, hospitals are fair game, and schools are fair game. That's why here in Sonoma County, various organizations and young people have been advocating successfully to create sanctuary school districts and sanctuary campuses. And right now, it's at the phase of passing these symbolic declarations. Now, the young people are pushing for the school districts to put those public declarations into practice. Well, how are you going to do it? Are you going to have signs? Are you going to close the door? Are all your staff trained to know that you don't have to allow ICE in, etc.? Yeah.
That's exactly what's happening at every campus. And there are people that are upset. I help organize Know Your Rights events for parents in Petaluma City Schools. And we got a really intimidating phone call on Monday about a Tuesday night event. I intercepted a flyer and it was a block number and wouldn't give his name, wouldn't give his organization. Why are you doing this for people who are not citizens? And the district didn't back down. They sent a plainclothes security person. They sent over top administrators, and we held it, and it was just a bully. There was no real threat to life, but there are people that are going to intimidate in order to scare. And it's scary because you don't know if there will be any follow-up. But I'm proud of our district, and I hope Santa Rosa follows suit.
Amazing. So as it seems like everyone here knows, the potential benefits of declaring yourself a sanctuary congregation far outweigh the risks. As we've already mentioned, people are suffering, and you will help ease that suffering.
I don't know if I can ease any suffering. Maybe I can get somebody to laugh once in a while, but just a history lesson, not necessarily for you, you probably know it already, but maybe some in our congregation don't, that youth actually, that is a golden commodity for our world. And by the way, I don't think the boundaries of the U.S. is where this is going. It's morality and it's the truth, even though the truth is looked at in different ways. But this church back in 1940s when World War II was going on, a group of youth from this church encircled Imanji Temple as people were threatening that with firebombing. And they were able to stop it. Why did they do it? And the Gerbath family is a big name in that many of us know. It's because they learned from their parents. So youth are strong, and I encourage as much as we can to look at that group and us as their adult mentors to look for the truth. It's the truth that will prevail, even though sometimes it gets a little rough-edged at times.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Yes, thank you. We have to continue to support young people. If they want to plan school walkouts, let's support them. When the students at Rancho decided not to attend school in early February on a day without immigrants, my son goes to that school, and he connected me with some students, and all I did was write a press release, help them out with some of the media work, gave them ideas as far as what they could do during the time that they were out of school, and they made a huge impact. So congratulations and thank you for considering declaring yourself a sanctuary. You will ease some suffering with your support. It will be a message that not everyone is othering undocumented migrants, and you will contribute to this idea that if more of us do it, then it will be harder for the federal government to come after any of us. If congregations declare themselves sanctuary, maybe the Board of Supervisors will declare itself sanctuary. If the federal government threatens to defund institutions because of their moral stance, the more we are, the better chance we have to resist and to challenge that, legally and politically. So, I will end there. We covered the Sonoma County Sanctuary Coalition, what's happening in the world of immigrant rights at the local, regional, and national levels. And then we brought it back to your congregation, why it's important for you to participate in this movement. Any last comments or questions?
A further comment or to what Paula had said about people, what would keep people from just putting their sleeping bags there, and I do understand what you're saying about it being a new time, and I do remember the older days, but a really careful reading of the proposal that to become a sanctuary church makes it pretty clear that that's not what we are offering as a church. Currently. I know there are possibilities of accompanying people who need help. I understand that, some people might be able to offer, some room in their house for a I understand that that is an individual decision, but that some people in the church might facilitate. That's my reading, at least, of that document. So just to speak to that comment.
I just have a question about the strength in numbers. Are there other congregations in the area that we'll be partnering with in saying we're sanctuary congregations?
Yes. Do you want to speak to that, Ben?
Yes, there are. There are several who are still discerning and in process, like our congregation. Some that are closer than we are, and some that are further out than where we are. And there are also some congregations who have already declared themselves as such. The two off the top of my head that I know of well are UUCSR, the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Santa Rosa, as well as the Petaluma? Unitarian Universalist Church of Petaluma, as well as Christ United Methodist Church in Santa Rosa. So that's the small but growing group of congregations that are are declaring themselves as such. And there's at least one other congregation in Sebastopol who is having a very serious conversation about it, and I've been in conversation with them about, like, let's do this together. This is not a time to go alone. This is a time to build a network of care so that we're all supporting each other.
Any other last comments or questions?
I'm just thinking about this in terms of what Ben just said, and that is there any type of movement afoot to have people that are already ready to cross over and to become sanctuaries to reach out to other churches who haven't even considered it?
You know, I don't know that there's a plan that's been articulated. It is happening, but I think this is one of those things that we build momentum. And, you know, once we make a declaration, if we decide to do that, that will get out there and it will spark like interest or curiosity, or maybe we should be doing that. Maybe we should look into that. And I'll also say personally, you know, I served in Colorado Springs for 17 years, where there is a very large evangelical population. And when I first got there, I was like, I don't know what to make of these evangelicals. Evangelicals are very diverse. And I think there are evangelical churches who maybe aren't part of this conversation yet who could be drawn into it. Because frankly, you know, our religion is based on serving the orphan, the widow, and the stranger. It's right there in our scripture that we are to welcome the stranger and provide hospitality. Jesus himself was a refugee very early on in life. He was always reaching out to people on the margins, those who were not counted as fully human by the empire at the time. And he's the one who said, whenever you provide hospitality to someone, you're providing it to me. So I think it's a basic part of our Christian identity that we provide hospitality to people, and that we provide that moral base for our community. I know there are plenty of Christians and plenty of communities who are not going that direction, but you know what? There's always time to repent. Stuart, we're just about at time, but we'll take another comment.
Is there a website or something that people can look up and learn more?
You know, the Sonoma County Sanctuary Coalition, we don't have a website yet. We're having conversations about how to do this work safely, and so that it doesn't come back and bite us in the butts. And
Don't want to give
out too much
Yeah.
information. Yeah. But I would say just call me. Just call me. My phone number is 707-273-2974. And the Reverend can give you my contact information as well, and Jenny as well.
Victoria, you have a website that you pointed me to and others just around kind of general information. It starts with an I, the ilrc.org.
Legal, yeah.
And
Yeah,
that's
and it's
generally
national.
speaking. Yeah, not a local thing.
Yeah.
Yep. Also, the mbop.org website often has, you know, new actions that are coming up. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the Rapid Response Network is one of the, what do we call it? Initiatives of the North Bay Organizing Project. Yep. Yeah, I'll just take that as an opportunity to say our church has already been doing accompaniment work with an immigrant family, actually multiple, most recently a family from Honduras. So we're already doing this work, and so this is an extension of that as well. Well, I just want to close. Renee, can you come here? So I want you to know I was at a meeting with Renee on last Thursday, and we were talking about sanctuary and checking in among congregations of where we were at, and I brought up an earnest question about, like, why is it important to make this public statement. And Renee, was like what you said and how you said it, it made me feel like you said something like, we don't have any reason to be afraid. We have each other, we have God, we have our faith, we have the moral arc of the universe. We have everything we need. We don't need to be afraid right now. They're afraid. The other side, the side that wants to suppress and oppress and dehumanize people, they're afraid. That's why they're doing this. We don't need to be afraid. We have God's love on our side. Thank you. Thank you, Renee. Yes, appreciate you. Thanks all for coming.